Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series on looking at China's superpower number 3, strategy, business planning, and budget. You have joined us for part 1 of this webinar series. It's part 1 of 4. And today's topic is looking at your top 10 checklists to set up a company in China. China is the world's second largest economy and an important market for any international company. Even if you're a small player, it's important to think big and have a China strategy in place. It is a common journey that businesses go through, and it is more predictable than most people realize. From hundreds of entrepreneurs, companies, and leaders from around the globe, we have learned that there are certain problems and frustrations that come along at a very predictable time on the China journey. More importantly, there are also certain ways to overcome them if you know the journey that's ahead of you. Woodburn has devised a China roadmap for companies that are looking to grasp at a China opportunity, implement a compliant and safe structure, and grow the business exponentially. Each company has their own unique journey in China, but the milestones and superpowers to be acquired are the same. And in this webinar series, we will be looking at how our registrants can acquire superpower number 3, which is strategy, business planning, and budget. Now is the time to put ideas onto paper, particularly during COVID-19, where there's so many restrictions, where people can't travel to China, they can't visit suppliers, they can't visit customers. Everything has to be done through video conferencing. The minimum that you can do if you're looking to go into the market is to put your ideas on paper. Developing your strategy, business plan, and budget for the Chinese market are critical documents to be continuously used, and you have to start somewhere. Your China business is not something that is going to be put together in a few hours haphazardly. To do it right, you'll need to take the time to partner with your management team, align the budget with the business plan and strategy, even if it takes longer than you like. So in today's session, in order to be able, and in this webinar series, we will be talking about how to actually draft your business plan, how to draft your budget. And today, we're going to be looking at the top 10 things that need to go into your business plan, okay? And these are also the top 10 things that you will need to set up your company in China if that is the phase that you want to go into. So before we begin today's session, again, a lot of new names. However, there are a lot of familiar names as well. It would be great for me, for those of you that are new to this series or haven't yet interacted with me, to let me know who you are. Are you a newbie in China, which basically means you found an opportunity and you're kind of fishing for information right now and educating yourself on how to protect your business, how to develop the business? Are you already a startup in China? You've never created a budget or business plan before, you've kind of winged it, but you've been established in China for a certain period of time, and now you want to get things down on paper and have a concrete vision for your organization. Are you an experienced China hand? Now, you'd be surprised, I do get a lot of experienced China hands on these webinars, and these are usually individuals that just want to get updated on certain things, get fresh ideas on how to continue, because again, conquer superpower 3, which is all about strategy and business planning and budget. This is something that is continuous. You are continuously striving to update and create your strategies. Many people during COVID-19 have had to pivot their businesses and adapt their strategies to the current situations that are occurring. So this webinar is for anybody that has gone into a situation where they've had to pivot. Please do interact with me. Tell me who you are. Are you a newbie? Are you a startup? I'm going to throw out names there. Emily Fang, what are you? Emra Sarazoy, who are you? Ingo Kleinschmidt, who are you? Please, please, please tell me who you are so that I do get an understanding. Lionel Gress, Matthias Ramdor, please interact with me. Tell me who you are and what you're interested in regards to this topic. How this webinar works. Well, basically, I educate you. So I will be throwing out certain times throughout this presentation questions. Please use the question section in the control panel or the chat box. Question section is a little bit better. You can insert your questions within. and hopefully during the Q&A, I'll be able to reach out to all of you. This is 60 to 70 minutes of your time. Make use of this time. It's a valuable spend of your time. So interact with me if you have questions, comments, etc. Please don't be shy. This is all complimentary. So, do use this time to your spend. Just a couple of technical things, because in the last couple of webinars, it seems that there is a tremendous amount of peak and volume going through the GoToWebinar system. So some people may get kicked off. Some people may have issues with the sound system. I apologize for that. I don't own GoToWebinar. I use it as my platform. We are recording today's session, so if that does happen to you, then please do know that the recording will be placed on our YouTube channel and you can definitely reference back to it. Why am I able to help you? Well, first of all, my name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. This is just to give a face to the voice. I have asked people whether they want me to use webcam or not, and a lot of people recently have said no because they don't have enough bandwidth with their home networks. So I'm not using the webcam, but eventually, probably in the second half of the year, I will start doing that. Why can I help you? Well, basically, I have 16 years of on-hand experience in corporate services in China, specifically in Shanghai. I've been working with over 500 companies with their expansion into the market, their implementation, and their growth. I'm also a creator of the China Roadmap program, which I will be highlighting again for those of you that missed the webinar series in March that reflected on that. I've also written an ebook about insights to consider for your China business during COVID-19. If you're interested to receive a copy, or if you haven't received a copy, my email is here, Christina@woodburnglobal.com. A copy of the presentation will be given, so you'll have a copy of the email as well. I'm giving this out complimentary, and if you'd like to take a read through, would be my pleasure. So I'm going to start off with today's presentation, reflecting a little bit on what I have developed as the China Roadmap. In order to succeed, grow, and be profitable in China, you need to follow this China Roadmap. Missing a step may cause you to run into trouble and spend more of your strict and defined budget on fixing the problems than actually using your budget to help you grow and develop your business. Now, as you can see from this China Roadmap, there are 3 milestones, which is on the left column. It's opportunity, implementation, and growth. Within each of these milestones, there is a superpower that you need to conquer and achieve and acquire. When you're looking at the first milestone of opportunity, what you need to do is educate yourself. Educate yourself. I always say that, knowledge is power in China. It really is. The more you know, the better leverage you have when dealing with negotiations, when dealing with employees, when dealing with customers and suppliers, when knowing how to run and manage your business. Research is a fundamental aspect for those of you that are newbies going into China, but it is also a fundamental aspect for those that are in the startup phase, as well as the experienced China hands. Research is something that should also be continuous in your China journey, whether that means looking at market segmentation, whether that means looking at brand awareness and getting updated. All of these different types of research studies are critical to knowing whether the market is still there for you, whether the opportunity is still there for you. The next milestone and the final milestone in the opportunity is developing a strategy. Now, I just want to emphasize here, because the topic today is about setting up a company, but developing a strategy, a business plan, and a budget does not necessarily mean you're going to implement an entity in China. It means that you are developing a strategy, a budget, and a business plan for your China business, whether that means you're simply transacting with China or whether it means you're actually incorporating something in China. The next is implementation. And again, this references whether you're setting something up or whether you are just transacting from your home office, but you've got to build an ecosystem. You've got to protect your business. You've got to implement operational guidelines and system processes. In when you implement all of those functions, the only thing that can happen is growth, because you will be able to look at the numbers, read the numbers, understand the numbers, and hopefully for those of you that are already established there, you have the ability to do that. If you don't, then that's something you need to work on. You need to be able to analyze, okay? That's critical because decisions have to be made, and there are definitely some characters out there that hate to make decisions, or they hate to have the decisions fall on their shoulders. But without being able to make, without being able, you can't make a decision basically without having the background knowledge, okay? Which encompasses all of the other 7 steps. And the final step is focus, right? When you know everything, when you're starting to make decisions, you are able to focus on those decisions and implement those decisions to move forward. Some people say, can some of the superpowers happen at the same time? Absolutely, they can. I've just put it in an order that for me makes sense, but they can happen at different stages depending on your strategy, depending on how you've entered the market, etc. So what are we covering today? We are going to be covering the 10 steps that I believe are important to set up a company in China. All right. Now, number 1 is partnering with a local market entry advisor. And this is all about, again, building your ecosystem. Now, a market entry advisor can be anybody, okay? It can be a chamber of commerce, it can be a lawyer, it can be a corporate service provider, it could be simply an advisor or a mentor, but be wary of who you are appointing as your local market entry advisor. Now, I'm going to add a case study here because this happens all too often. I had a client back in the day who was in such a rush to enter the Chinese market that the first step they did was they found an individual, and then they hired this individual through their headquarters, like not the most legal step. They then asked this individual to set up their own domestic Chinese company to help facilitate payments and receive payments. And then eventually, around 2 years down the line, they set up their own entity, taking their time doing it, which is all well and good. But eventually, as they were financing this employee's business, they never saw financial statements, so they never saw concretely how their money was being used in his entity. And quite frankly, they didn't have the right to ask for it. I mean, of course, there's a partnership involved and they should be able to say it, but they never got it. If they did get it, it was all in Chinese and they never went the step further to get it translated. So all that initial financing that they made within their employee's domestic company, there's no transparency. They only have a track record of what they sent over, but of how it was actually being used and what was the balance afterwards, no transparency. Transparency only was created once they had their own entity and they had control of all of their financial systems, settings, operational guidelines, etc. So it is very critical to know who you're partnering with, how you're setting up your structures, because down the line, this really impacted their budget. And when they started to ask questions, they weren't getting responses, okay? That's probably the biggest obstacle is the communication front. And quite frankly, they didn't have a right to say, can we have access to that company? Because they didn't own it. They had no link to it besides financing it, all right? So be wary of who you're partnering with, how you're partnering with them, and also how you're structuring your businesses along the way. Ultimately, what I then said to them in the first meeting that I ever had to them was, I said, do you realize you've paid for setting up 2 entities in China with 2 registered capitals, which you didn't really need to do? And they realized they overspent in their initial startup phase, which is a very common problem amongst newbies and startups in China. Now, I just want to highlight one avenue here. I'm a member of these chambers, so I put them up here, and these associations. This is part of your ecosystem, okay? Now, nearly all of these chambers, they have business advisors. If you become a member of them, they have business advisors, they have networks, they will refer you to people within the organization. it is great to become a member of certain associations. Now here, these are the ones I'm a member of. I'm very familiar with the German China related associations in Germany. There are also, for example, Swiss China councils. There are in almost every jurisdiction a China related association. This is a great starting point for you to build your network, get within your membership fee, to have free advisory, to be going to certain seminars and educating yourself. You know, like I say, one of the biggest things that you need to do, especially in the implementation phase, is build your ecosystem. But if you are on a very tight budget, which is what most people are suffering right now, you can get a lot of free education and free advice through lawyers, corporate service providers, chambers of commerce, China country associations. The EU SME Center, they are on hold right now, and hopefully they will get their, I believe it's phase 4 planning open soon, where you can also get free research reports on different industries and sectors. So definitely do your own little research on chambers and centers that can help you get information either free of charge or for very small fees. It really helps. Find yourself local market entry providers. Now, I will say this as a disclaimer. The problem in China is that the legal system is really not black and white, and everybody has their own interpretation of the laws and regulations. This interpretation also stands a lot from experience, okay? So what I might say today as the 10 top things that are critical, another corporate service provider might say those 10 are absolutely ridiculous. I think it's these 10, okay? This is the problem in China. You won't hear same information from everyone, which, you know, obviously when you go to doctors, you hope to hear the same diagnosis. You're not going to hear that from the different service providers, lawyers, etc. in China. So, you know, this is a people business. Talk to people and get a gut feeling, sentiment. Do you like them? Don't go by, do you like what they're saying? Because that won't help you anywhere. But do you like them as an individual? Do you trust them? Do you think you can form a relationship with them over a certain period of time? And do you think they're working in your interest? Okay, it's all about, again, we're in a people-oriented business right now, and it is about developing those relationships and seeing who you want to work with. But again, be prepared. Everyone will say something different. I just think you shouldn't go with what you want to hear. You should go with someone who is telling you what is probably the truth, is being direct, is being honest, and is telling you what it is. If it's always what you want to hear, you might get disappointed along your China journey, and that's an obstacle that might then appear where you have to change then your structure or do certain things. The second most important item on your checklist is knowing how you're going to incorporate this entity in China. Who's going to own the shares? And this is really a question that pops up a lot with very lengthy discussions, because there are a lot of things you need to think about when incorporating your entity. But this is one where people really get scared because of the liability that may befall them. So, you know, who should own the shares of your company? Should it be an individual? So if you're an entrepreneur, should it be you as an individual that's opening the company in China? Or would it be better to set up a holding company or a company outside of China that would then hold the liability for the China entity? There's no right or wrong there, okay? I get scared when clients decide to use themselves only because there is a greater liability on their shoulders, but there's also a very high tax component, which I'm never fond of. I always prefer when it's actually a company that's a shareholder that's incorporating in China. So here are a couple of questions that I've listed to make you think about how to incorporate your entity in China, okay? These are questions that should be thought questions, thought-provoking questions. Who is ultimately the decision maker? And, you know, as I started out in my intro, a lot of people don't necessarily have the character to be decision makers, but who will be the decision maker? Who will be signing off on the documents and making decisions about the China entity? Okay. Who will be the chief financial officer or finance manager? Are you going to be outsourcing that function, or is that going to be an in-house function through the headquarter, or will you hire someone? Again, very important for operational guidelines, but you may want to make this individual the supervisor of your company. Who will be operating the bank accounts? Okay, who's going to be the bank signatory? Who's going to be approving payments online? Do you know how the banking system works in China to operate it? Okay, again, think about it from an operational perspective. So I get a lot of clients who say, yeah, I want to set up in China. I start asking these questions. They haven't thought it all through. And this is part of your business plan, which will then impact your budget. Okay, what people do you need to do all of these functions? Are you going to try and outsource most of it? And then you got to think from a budget perspective, can you afford these outsourced providers? Or are you going to try and do a lot of things in-house, and then you have employees doing it, and how much are those salaries that it will impact? So should you do a comparison between employee salaries and outsourced providers? Absolutely. So much that goes into it, and that's all part of the research function as well. Who's going to keep control of the company chops as well as the business licenses? This is what I call the company kit. Who's going to handle all of that? Chops are like, together with VAT invoices, they are like gold. Okay, you can do anything, and anyone can be a decision maker by having a chop and putting it on a piece of document. When you're using the shareholder, so whether it's an individual or a company, who's going to be the authorized signatory? So with some bigger companies, they may have a board of directors in the head office. Ideally, you want one of those people to be the authorized signatory, not all three, because when documents have to be signed, that one piece of document has to travel globally to get original signatures. Again, this is all about efficiency, right? And then from a corporate structure perspective, and I'll show you what the corporate structures look like in China, these all require people. All right, shareholder, you need an authorized signatory. And then you have two structures here that you can create. The one on the left has a board of directors structure. The one on the right has an executive director structure. Board of directors, minimum 3 people. Executive director, 1 person. Chairman of the board can also be a legal rep GM. Executive director can be legal rep GM. And then you need a supervisor, which cannot be any of those people, has to be separate. So, you know, what type of structure are you going to create? I always say go with simplicity, but it really depends on your parent company and, you know, what are the company bylaws in the parent company. If you are an entrepreneur, then I would recommend that you take the structure on the right, where you are the authorized signatory as a shareholder. You are also then the executive director, legal rep GM, and then you need a supervisor to be appointed. But the biggest question, obviously, with this whole structure is who are going to be these people, okay? And then comes the next thing is, what's the criteria of these people, okay? So let me go back to the structure. None of these people have to reside in China. None. Okay. They should not be picked at random. You should appoint people that are responsible for the China business and will be informed and educated on what is going on in that China business. Generally, when you've got the board of director structure, the chairman of the board will also be the legal rep and GM. Okay. Member of the board can be legal rep, who can also be GM, or you could also have another appointment where the legal rep and GM are separate people. Executive director can be legal rep GM. You can also make those separate people, but it is very important that the supervisor is an individual that is completely separate from the column on the left. So the board of director, legal rep, and GM. So ultimately, if you're looking at a very simple structure, you would have a minimum of 2 people. You would have the person who's authorized signatory as shareholder, be also the executive director, legal rep, GM, and then you would have a second person acting as a supervisor. The legal rep, most critical position. Supervisor, I usually recommend it to be someone who is in a finance role, because the supervisor is actually making sure that the company is in compliance, making sure that the board of directors, legal rep, GM are doing their jobs and fulfilling what they have said they're going to fulfill in the articles of association of the company. And usually the finance person has that overview and sight on the company to be able to report to the shareholder and say if something's not going right. The third item that I think is absolutely critical when setting up your company and ultimately dictates what type of company you're going to be setting up is choosing your business activity and choosing it wisely. So the first thing to decide before you set up a company in China is the industry you're going to be trading in. And there are thousands of permitted business activities, which include trading, agriculture, hospitality, manufacturing, consulting, advisory, etc., etc., etc. However, one must keep in mind of the negative list. So the negative list lists out industries, fields, and businesses from which investments are barred or are limited. Okay, and market access to foreign investors in these industries that are listed on the negative list, they either have to go into joint venture partnerships or they're completely restricted from the market. So the first step is really understanding, is your industry in the negative list, yes or not? If it is not, then you're free to set up your own structure and entity. If it is, do you have to set up a joint venture? Or are you completely restricted from the market? Representative offices are something that, from my view, are becoming obsolete. I currently now only recommend clients to set up representative offices if they are only going to be utilized as marketing offices for a long-term period for the organization. Representative offices basically can do nothing in China except grant 4 work permits and visas to foreigners. They can't generate revenue. They can't issue invoices. They are purely liaison offices that are doing type of quality control and marketing activities. If you want to actually invoice an entity in China or you want to generate revenue, then you would need to establish a limited liability company. The limited liability company, you can set up a variety of them, and here I've actually shown what the templates look like for the business scopes, for the business activities. So for the first one, you've got wholesale, distribution, import, export. The second one, you've got wholesale, internet retail, which is the e-commerce component. The next one is you've got development, manufacturing, and processing, which also includes import, export, wholesale, and commission agency, which basically refers to distribution. The last one is usually the standard for any form of consulting company that's established, whether it's a technical consulting company or not. Now, I'm going to give you 2 tips when you're thinking about your business activity. And again, these 2 things should actually be going inside your business plan. The first tip, take a pen and paper and list in a bullet point format what are going to be the activities that your company is going to be doing in China. List everything. And I want you to make 2 lists. The first list should be what you think the company is going to be doing in the first 3 years of operation and what your vision is for the first 10 years of operation. Okay? So 2 lists, and maybe there will be overlap, right? So I can imagine that you will want to do marketing in the first 3 years, which means that you will probably want to do marketing for the whole 10 years. I assume it'll be a continuous activity. I assume that you will want to do import export in the first 3 years. You will probably want to do import export in the next 10 years. So there will be things that are in both lists, but what additions would you add in your 10-year vision, if anything at all? For example, if you're trading now, could you envision that you might be manufacturing later on? Okay. If you're only providing consulting now, can you envision trading later on? So think about that in terms of your bullet points. So take out a piece of paper, make your bullet point list of all the activities you can imagine, all the products you can envision and all the services that you want to do. Okay, that's step number one. This is something that I teach in my workshop about developing your China roadmap. Create that document. Point number two, benchmark your competitors. That's all about research. You can easily ask a provider to, when you give them a list of your competitors, let's say 3 or 4 competitors with their Chinese names and addresses, you can ask a provider to go and log into the Ministry of Commerce website to obtain a copy of the business license of your competitor, and you can read the Chinese name, who's the legal rep, what's the investment capital, and most importantly, what are the activities that they say they're performing in their entity. Okay. In some instances, it becomes very interesting because you will find that they're marketing for activities that may not be in their business scope. So actually, they're not allowed to be doing it, right? Now is not the time to do something cruel and denounce them, but it gives you insight to how they are operating and understanding how they're operating within the Chinese market. Okay, this is all about benchmarking yourself, okay? And it gives you an understanding then also of how you should be creating your business activity, and it may give you an insight of what you can have and what you cannot have on the bullet point list that you have created. Okay, so 2 tips for you there. Take a piece of paper, bullet point, list everything you want to do, all products, all services. And number 2, benchmark and research your competitors. Okay, find out what's on their business scopes. What business activities do they say they're performing? The next item on your checklist is find your ideal location and take your time. Now, time is of the essence to most people, and most people will say, I wish I was established yesterday. The issue is in China is that once you choose your province, once you choose the city, once you choose the district, you cannot move away from that unless you want to go through an extremely bureaucratic process that takes time and may even halt your business. Okay, finding your ideal location is critical. All right, now I've listed some triggers that you should be asking yourself when finding the most ideal location in China. Budget, very important. So for example, you might say Shanghai is way too expensive for me. It's got the highest standard of living, employee salaries are expensive, rent is expensive. I simply cannot afford to be in Shanghai, which means I'll be on the outskirts in places like, I don't know, Nanjing, Wuxi, Suzhou, Kunshan. There are so many different little cities that are surrounding Shanghai that, again, have cheaper salaries, cheaper rent, and may offer some certain incentives, okay? It may also depend on your chosen business activity. So I have one client that was pushed by their potential business partner to go to Wuxi. Actually, they didn't even have to do any research on ideal location because their business partner that was going to help develop the business and do customers and suppliers and all this kind of thing basically said, if you want to do this project with us, you need to be next to us. We are in Wuxi, you come to us. Okay, so it might depend on suppliers, it might depend on customers. Okay, you might also find certain zones where they are particular to your industry and your business activity. Okay, so you may find some very high-tech electronic type of zones where they're only attracting these type of industries, kind of creating a creative hub for those industries and sectors, and that's where you want to be. And they might even then offer you incentives like a certain period rent-free, or other forms of incentives. So definitely do your research. I also want to emphasize here that there are real estate agents who provide market research on finding your ideal location. So this is particularly for those that are looking to manufacture in China. You can go to these real estate agents, obviously for a certain fee. They will do an analysis for you on what might be the ideal location based on all the raw materials and all the essentials you need for the actual factory plant. Okay, So do that very, very wisely and take your time doing that. I have had clients that have based their location on employees who, after a certain period of time, left the company, and the location actually was not ideal. Other clients have based their decisions on grants and subsidies that they have been able to obtain from local governments, again, based on the activity, industry, and sector that they're in. There's so many reasons of why you might go to a certain location. Definitely think of it very wisely and think of all these aspects and trigger points. Once you've found your ideal location, the next point on your checklist is finding your office space. Okay, so obviously if you're going to set up a manufacturing facility, you're going to be looking for a manufacturing plant, and you'll probably be on the outskirts of any city going into the industrial zones. If you are looking to have a commercial space, you will probably be a little bit closer to the CBD. In Shanghai, there are several CBDs where you can locate. Some are cheaper than others. Again, it will require a certain level, when you're looking at commercial spaces, if you're a lawyer or a corporate service provider, image might be a huge component that you have to think about, which means that you're going to pay a higher level of rent to be in a very central location. When you're thinking about factory space or commercial space, definitely think about the relationship with the landlord. Is the landlord subleasing? Is he allowed to sublease? If he's not subleasing and he owns the property, can he provide you with all the documents you need for the company registration? You got to think about management fees. Okay, when you're talking about rental prices, make sure you know whether the management fees are included or not. Think about utility bills. Think about decoration cost. Implementing all the fixed assets, whether it's furniture, chairs, printers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things to think about. What I tell a lot of my clients that want to start up, so they're in the startup phase of their operation, and they don't necessarily have in the budget the cost for decoration and all these fixed assets, because they don't need such a big office initially. They will go to a business center where all of that is kind of taken care of you. And it's more of a flexible lease arrangement. Now I'm going to go into something that I think is very critical. I've created an actual webinar purely on this topic, so I'm going to fly through this, but it's so important. Finding your ideal location and then finding your ideal registered office address is so important. First of all, your registered office address should be your operational office address. Okay, not that you choose a registered office address and actually your office is somewhere else and your people are based there, because if you do get a surprise visit from the government, they're going to go to your registered office address and find nobody. That does not bode well for you. Okay, from a legal perspective, you need to have a minimum of a 1-year lease when you start the incorporation of your company in China. Virtual office addresses are illegal and should be avoided as much as possible. I have had only one client in all my history of 16 years where they have been provided by the local government, by the MOFCOM, a signed lease agreement, a lease agreement, but also a signed explanation stating that they are in a virtual location until the property is fully constructed and built, and then they can move into another space. Otherwise, you will have people offering you virtual office locations with no explanation and telling you it's okay. It is not okay, not unless you have that separate paper telling you it is okay, all right? It is something that is illegal and definitely something that you should spot check and verify. You need to have, when you register your company, a series of documents that I will highlight later on in the presentation from your landlord. It's everything from the floor plan to the ownership certificate. Now, it is critical that on the ownership certificate, it states what type of property it is. Now, if you're a manufacturing facility, obviously, you're not going to go into a designated area that is retail, okay? It has to match. So commercial spaces are for trading companies, service companies, etc. Retail space is for shops. Industrial space is for warehousing and factories. Okay. One of the things that many business centers offer, which I think is an ideal solution, it's also a legal solution, is that they offer what is called registered office address only. This means that you will sign a formal lease agreement with them, and for the period where you're incorporating the company to maybe up to a year's time, they will allow you to have this registered office address only solution where you don't actually have a real office space in their property, but you have the ability to register your company there, and you can utilize the external services of the center. It's obviously a much cheaper solution than renting a physical room with 4 walls. Now comes the difficulty where you suddenly realize that the location you've chosen is not a success for your business, and now you want to change cities. Hopefully this does not happen to you, although in my background and history, it has happened to a few clients. So let's say you originally set up in Beijing, you find out after 2 years Beijing is not the right city, and you want to set up a company in Shanghai. You cannot just relocate your business. Impossible. You have set up your Beijing company under Beijing legislation and regulations and with the Beijing Ministry of Commerce. It means that if you want to set up in Shanghai, either you set up a brand new entity or you set up a branch of your Beijing company. Okay, but you cannot just relocate it. It does not work like that at all. So this is why it is so critical to know your ideal location and then to choose the right registered office address. Now, from a tax perspective, what is very critical is also about your district. So let's say in Shanghai, you have registered your company in Channing district, and now because you're growing, you want to move to a new district. Well, what you've got to realize is the tax bureaus in each district are competing one with the other for tax revenue. So what you need to do if you want to change districts is do a tax closure audit in your first district to then reopen in your new district, which could give you a lag time of 8 to 12 weeks where you don't have the ability to either purchase FAPCAOs or issue FAPCAOs. So it's a halt in your business. So this is why it's very important from the early stages to choose a district where you can see the growth in that district. You can, you make a bit of research on the property values, what's available. If I grow and I need to move out, is there space where I can move out, etc. So that you don't have this halt in your business by doing this tax closure audit in the first district and then reopening in the second district. Okay, now you need to determine the legal structure that fits your business activity. Okay, this is number 6 on your checklist. So you have created this document with the bullet points of the activities that you want to do within your structure in China. And now you need to figure out what type of entity will suit them. So these are all the types of entities that exist in China. So you've got the representative office, the WFOE, the FICE, what I call a DOE, that's a domestically owned enterprise, a joint venture, and then you've got foreign invested partnerships. The last one, the FIPs, are generally for law firms or accounting firms that have partnership structures. Generally, foreign investors will fall under the WFOE and FICE. Currently, with the new foreign investment law, all of these terms should not exist anymore. Okay, but it's very early stages right now with the foreign investment law that I'm keeping these terms and conditions because that's what people are researching. That's what people know historically. But in theory, under the new foreign investment law, you are just basically either setting up a liaison office or a limited liability company. It's all a matter of who is the ultimate shareholder and what's the business scope. So just to go very quickly through this, a rep office, liaison office cannot generate any revenue. A WFOE, I usually say that a WFOE is geared to more service-oriented companies because they're not trading. Foreign invested commercial enterprise means that you're doing commercial activities in relation to trade and manufacturing. Domestically owned enterprises means that the shareholder is owned by a mainland Chinese individual or a mainland Chinese company. Joint ventures are usually that there are 2 or more shareholders, and then you've got foreign parties and Chinese parties. So you've got to know, with the business activities that you've highlighted, would you be a woofie because you're only doing service? Would you be a FICE because eventually you're going to trade? Are you going to start off with having your mainland Chinese staff create his own company and then change it later on? So many options here. And you've got to really think about what is the right legal structure for you. I think there are 3 items that most people don't look at when they are when they place a vision on their company. One is liability, one is flexibility, and one is marketability. So I say liability because obviously if you set up a limited liability company, there will be greater liability than if you just set up a liaison office. However, a liaison office does nothing for you unless you're purely doing market, and long-term you're only going to be doing marketing, okay? A limited liability company is like an LLC anywhere else in the world. It has a certain liability to it. Flexibility is critical, again, because a RO a representative office cannot generate revenue. A woofie cannot trade. So again, with the bullet points that you've created on the paper, you want to create a structure that is flexible enough to accomplish your short-term activities, but also to help you with your long-term activities that you want to incorporate later on. So I'll give you an example. I have some clients who say, I want to do wholesale trade, but I have a feeling at some point I want to open my own shop. So I will need a retail space. How does that all work? Okay, well, you can set up your wholesale trading company, and when you're ready to do retail, you set up that retail shop as a branch office, and you just add retail into your business scope at the point that you want to do retail. Okay, but it's knowing what phase, you know, I always tell clients to create phases of their business, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You've got to know at what phase that's gonna happen. Marketability is also critical. And I explain this a lot in my marketing webinars that I do, because image is very important for Chinese consumers. It's also very important for companies to know that there is a certain level of commitment to the foreign company in the Chinese market. And again, it's important to know what structures fit into that whole image and marketability aspect. Point 5 is choosing a local service agent. So I highlighted this. Really, it's not about selling my services. I just want to emphasize that. Why I put it in here is because I have a lot of clients who have in the past utilized their local employees who know nothing about incorporating entities in China to use them to do the actual filings. Having never seen business licenses, having never understood if the tax registration was done because they didn't know what questions to ask the local employee. And it was also then discovered that the local employee didn't know he had to do many of the items for the incorporation. There are also a lot of one-man shows out there that do the incorporations themselves. There's no, how do you say, back-end support with them. Beware of who you're working with. Beware of the size of the company, understand what you're paying for. And if you're going to choose to go with your employee doing the setup for you, at least you should be knowledgeable about what should be done so that you can give guidance. Because if your local employee has never done a setup in his life before, I can tell you he's not going to know how to do it. All right. So make sure you are choosing the right person to incorporate your company. Make sure you're checking that all the licenses are issued. Make sure you've got a copy of all of these licenses. Make sure you've got copies of your articles of association. Make sure you've got all of these documents on hand, because these are documents that will be continuously used as your company is updated over time. It is important to do your due diligence on who you're using. Just another point on this. I have seen a lot of companies use not so good local service agents to do their incorporations and actually spend more on fixing the problems that were incurred than actually just paying a little bit of a higher fee at the get-go. So, you know, when you're thinking about pricing, okay, do your benchmarking, but also, you know, use common sense who you're going to utilize to incorporate your company. Naming your company is another item on your checklist that I think is an extremely important one. Choosing the Chinese name of your company, because what is actually registered at the government is the Chinese name. Now, in the words of Shakespeare, what's in a name? So I'll give you the example of Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I only market myself with Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. The only place you will ever see my Chinese name will be on a fapiao that I issue to you if you become a client. That'll be the only place, because all of my contracts are in the English language. I don't translate them into Chinese. And so the only place you will see my Chinese name is on an actual fapiao. That is a decision we have made because our clients are foreign investors. So what's more important to them is being able to read out loud Woodburn Accountants and Advisors versus our Chinese name. That's how we've created our business model. Now, if you are going into the Chinese market, right, is the Chinese name going to be critical for you or is it not? Okay. And another component that you have to know is that registering your Chinese name for your company has nothing to do with registering your Chinese name for your trademark. They are two very separate procedures. And I have had a lot of clients who've chosen a name for their company and couldn't get that name registered as a trademark because someone else was already using it. All right, which means that they couldn't use that Chinese name for their company for any marketing material. So be very aware of the value behind the Chinese name, okay? Now, as you can see here, it's a very technical way of how they develop names in China. So in Shanghai, for example, if you translated our name into English, it would be Woodburn Management Consulting, Shanghai in brackets, Company Limited, okay? So if you were going into manufacturing, it would be ABC, the name of the product. So let's say Transformers Manufacturing, and if it's in Shanghai, Shanghai Company Limited. Shanghai is based on the city of formation where the company is actually registered. Remember, please remember that the name of your company is a separate application from the trademark that you want to register in China. So if you want to register a Chinese name, make sure that your first step should probably be, let's check if that Chinese name is available for trademark registration. Let's also do an online check if it's available for the name, and then we'll see what comes out of that. It is such a difficult process. If I look at a timeline for an incorporation, the biggest obstacle you will find is in the name of the company because there's a lack of availability. So this will, you know, although I've set a certain timeline in the timeline I'm going to show you, that's in ideal, very ideal scenarios. But I have had cases where it's taken up to 2 months of name registrations, coming up with over 150 names to find one that would be appropriate for the company that could also then be used for the trademark registration. If it's not necessary to register for the trademark, then it's not a problem, okay? But just keep aware of the relationship between the naming of the company and the trademark registration. Number 9 is getting your paperwork done. And this is probably something that then extremely overwhelms people when they realize what's involved. So what I'm going to show you first of all is the process to set up a trading company. Okay, I haven't added here manufacturing. I've used here trading as an example. So the first step is consultation and drafting of the application documents, which normally you do with your district or city MOFCOM, Ministry of Commerce. Usually takes about 7 days to draft everything. You then have to do the name approval, which here again I've highlighted 7 days. That is if the first batch, one of the names in the first batch that gets submitted is approved. I usually tell my clients to create, again, a document, bullet point with between, if they have the ability, between 5 and 20 names so that we can register all 20 in the first batch, and we'll see what comes back in approval. We can do online checks. However, the online checks are not always up to date. So you first have to do the online check, see what's available, and then we can move on to the formal name approval, where it's a manual check to see what's free. You do an online declaration now, which started in 2019, was absolutely catastrophic because the systems were not really adaptable. You had to use a certain browser, a very old version, to be able to upload documentation. However, the online declaration, if everything is uploaded, can actually take sometimes just 48 hours. It's amazing. However, if the system is not functioning properly, which in many cases happened to us in certain cities like Tianjin and Wuxi, we had to go in person to submit, which obviously took longer. Then the business license is issued within 7 days. You then do a registration for all the company CHOPS, which takes 2 days, and then you do a CA application, which also takes 2 days. This is, for me, basically step one, a very big step one of the incorporation process. It takes about 29 days, around 4 weeks to do all of this once all your documents are prepared and ready to go. What I haven't added here, which I will go through in detail, is the actual document list for submission, okay, which is also a bit tricky. So I just want to emphasize here, 29 days to get your business license and CHOPS, meaning that company CHOPS, etc., can be contracts, etc., can be signed and whatnot. A bank account is not opened yet, so payments to receive or pay is difficult, but 29 days to get your business license. It's amazing. When I compare to when I first arrived in Shanghai in end of 03, beginning of 04, oh my God, it took it took 3 months, 4 months to get a business license. So times have certainly changed over the last 16, 17 years. It's great. Then you've got what I call a big step 2 for all the remainder steps. And again, like I said, this is for trading companies. So it takes between 25, I've put a very optimistic 25 there. It takes between 25 and 30 days to open your bank account. It's horrendous. So what I try to tell clients is, even before the incorporation, think about what bank you want to work with. It's not something that's urgent, but definitely think about who you want to work with, maybe meet with the banks, understand their online banking systems. It does take 25 days to get all the approvals done. There's a lot of video conference calls, meeting face-to-face that has to happen as well. Tax registration, 4 days. Commercial company registration, which allows you to trade, is 7 days. Customs registration, 5. Foreign exchange registration for import-export business, 2. And then about 2 weeks to get the customs e-port registration, allowing you to do trade all by yourself without using an intermediary. So the whole step 2 phase takes about 57 working days, which is around 10 weeks. So in total, you're looking at about 14 to 15 weeks to incorporate your company. 9, 10, 11, 12 are not needed for consulting companies. Okay, I just want to emphasize that, which means the timeline is much shorter. What is added in here for manufacturing companies is before the bank account opening, you will have to do an environmental license application where they will look at the manufacturing process of your plant to make sure it is, you've dealt with all the waste and pollution and all of those aspects. I have 2 slides of the document lists, so please don't get a shock. This is slide 1, this is slide 2. All of those bullet points are individual documents that are required. Now, obviously, in the service that we provide, we also give English versions. The English versions are not actually submitted to the government, but if you do not read Chinese and you do not understand what is in the Chinese version, you should not be incorporating a company. And I have a lot of clients who have tried to save time, save cost by asking their providers not to provide the English version. It is wrong. I actually prefer not to work with a client who doesn't want that. You should be knowing exactly what you're signing, okay? So the English versions, again, not submitted. They are there for the reference of the client to understand what they are signing, okay? Now, the first item is the certificate of incorporation, which is actually for the shareholder. So if it's an individual, it would be a passport. If it's a company, it would be the business license and memorandum of understanding of the shareholding company. This has to be notarized by a local notary within your jurisdiction, and then that document has to be notarized by the Chinese consulate. On average, my clients need between 2 to 3 weeks to get that done. So you have to add that into the timeline prior to the actual incorporation of the company. Then you've got all of these documents like articles of association, letter of appointments, letter of commitments, general application forms, power of attorneys, letters of authorization, commitment forms for business scopes, for approval, name confirmation, ownership structure charts, which is critical because the banks want to know who are the beneficial owners of the company. I ask clients to provide signing pages because there are always updates that are given. You know, there's always a back and forth communication with the Ministry of Commerce. And so instead of sending updated documents and re-signing, it's always easier for a corporate service provider or lawyer to have appointed signatures available. You need passport copies of all of the individuals that are part of the structure. And then the last 4 are the documents you need from the landlord, which is the office leasing agreement, property certificate, the owner's business license, and the floor plan. So it is a hefty document list that's needed for submission, all right? Please be aware of that. Now, what you will find when you read through these lists later on is that there is no requirement to submit a business plan or a budget, which means that people don't want to do them. Please ignore that point. You need to do them. All right. If you want your business to be successful in China, you need to have a business plan and you need to have a budget. Okay. This just gives you a bit of an understanding of what it takes to incorporate the company from a document perspective and from a timeline perspective. And you need to know that information because you need to know when certain things are going to kick off. Now, the next item I think is also very important on your list. Now, obviously, this will not be important if in your business plan you have indicated that you're not planning on hiring any foreigners on the ground in China. If you are hiring foreigners, it is so important to understand how the work permits and residence visas work. Okay, and I want to give you a case study on this. I had a client who basically hired a team of people before the business license was even issued and paid them in cash. So wrong. One of those individuals, actually no, sorry, 50% of those individuals were foreigners, and they were denounced. And 2, how do you call that? Where they're not wearing police outfits, undercover. They were not police, but they were undercover agents coming from the Public Security Bureau. Because they had been denounced, and they actually took every one of those foreigners into their office. I don't want to say into a jail because they were not put into a cell, but they were definitely kept separated within rooms, and some of them were even kicked out of the country because they didn't have the right documentation on them. If you are an entrepreneur, if you are a business owner, please treat your employees well and kindly. By law, anywhere in the world, this is a universal law. You cannot hire an individual without an entity. I'm providing a dramatic pause there. You cannot hire an individual without having a legal entity on the ground. Okay? In China, freelance agreements are a very gray area. Okay, you want your employee, if you're doing freelance agreements, really think about that structure. It can bring you a lot of liability down the line. Okay, if you want to hire someone, use an intermediary to do that hiring so that they are properly employed for a certain period of time before you actually have the company registered. Okay, do not hire someone and pay them in cash. First of all, it's not right, it's not legal. Number 2, that employee will have complete leverage over you. So if you try to fire them one day, they will say, well, you hired me in the beginning by paying me in cash, didn't pay me social insurance, didn't pay me tax. And I say this out of all experience, okay? Please keep this in mind. This happens. Don't think it's not going to happen to you. So please make sure that when you hire someone, you're doing it in the right step at the right stage and you have everything thought about. If you're looking to hire foreigners, the system has changed since 2017. I will probably very concretely say this is probably the hardest step, besides the bank account opening, to get accomplished. In order to get a visa issued for someone, there are these points that you can see on this slide that the government will take a look at in relation to qualification, annual salary, educational qualifications, work experience, time spent in China, Mandarin proficiency, location of employment, age, and then there are a couple of extra credit lines. For each of these line items, the person or individual will get points, which will then put them into either three categories: tier A, tier B, or tier C. The average of individuals will probably be placed under tier B, but you may have people that are placed under tier C, or very highly qualified individuals under tier A. It is a complicated system. Okay, be aware of this. Before you hire an individual for that role, check first whether that individual qualifies under any of these tier systems to know whether they can get the visa or not. Okay, I've put in this presentation about hiring a foreigner, hiring a mainland Chinese, relatively straightforward. Please only hire them once you have the company established or you use an intermediary initially. So in relation to Chinese visas, just a couple more points. Generally speaking, the lack of Mandarin proficiency is of little worry. I know that that's something that always people are saying, well, the foreigners don't speak Chinese, and we don't necessarily want them to. It is easier to get the visas if they're not located in the big cities like Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, or Beijing. If they are employed for mid to very senior level positions, again, you shouldn't really worry about that. And probably you should keep a certain level of quota in your company about how many foreigners you want to hire. The biggest question that will be raised by the Public Security Bureau will be, why do you need this foreigner? And why can a Chinese not fulfill that role? So if they do ask you that, you need to have the answer to that question. Okay? If you're hiring a foreigner, why do you need them? Again, make a bullet point list, which is great for your business plan as well, because you need to show why you need a foreigner to your shareholders. Why do you need a foreigner? And why can a Chinese not fulfill that role? Something that I want to highlight for entrepreneurs that may be on today's webinar is the startup visas in Shanghai. So if you've incorporated your company in Shanghai, which many startups do concurrently with working for another company, they may be able, after a certain period of time, and an application to apply for a startup visa. And it is for certain industries, like science and technology. It's also if you're locating in a certain space, like incubators, etc. Then you may be able to get this startup visa. It is valid for 1 year, can be extended. But ultimately, what the government wants is that at some point you put yourself under your own entity and transfer that startup visa to a work permit and residence visa. So just to conclude, regarding the 10 points on the checklist, partnering with a local market entry advisor, this just means get help, build your ecosystem. Getting help is not something that should be shameful. It's something that should be, useful to you. Owning shares in your company, understand who is the owner of the company, who do you want to have all the liability, how are you going to structure that, who are you going to choose as individuals within your organization. Business activity is all about, what are you doing in China? List it out. Finding your ideal location, where do you want to situate your company? Think long and hard about that. In regards to finding your office space, what district do you want to be located in? What's your budget and how do you want to start off, whether it's in a business center or in your own office? To determine the legal structure that fits your business activity, again, get help, get advice on that to make sure you're choosing the right structure. Choosing a local service agent, investigate them, ask questions. Do they really understand the process? Naming your company. Who are you targeting? Right? Spend time on your name and save your brand. Think about the trademark aspect. Getting your paperwork in order, again, using an appropriate provider who will go the extra mile for you and ask you, who will really guide you throughout the process. Applying for visas is really all about, are you relocating foreigners and making sure that they are protected within this whole step. So top tip for today is, when you're creating your business plan and when you're creating your budget, you want to incorporate the top 10 list into these two documents, okay? You want to make sure that these top 10 items are within the various chapters within the two documents that you're creating. And we'll go into more detail on that tomorrow. So how can we help you? Well, first of all, we've developed this China Roadmap program to accelerate your entry into the market, whether that's just for transactions or whether it's actually for an implementation. We obviously do incorporation advisory. We also do business plan and budget validations. We do actually incorporate companies in both China and Hong Kong. And we also help with implementation and growth services when those companies are established. Now, for those of you that are on here today, if you want to talk about your incorporations, or you want to talk about the stage you might be in your incorporations, or you have certain doubts, book a session with me. Again, these strategy sessions are supposed to be brainstorming sessions to give you a little bit of guidance in the right way. They're 100% free, absolutely no strings attached. Don't be shy to set up a strategy session with me. In the chat section, I am just going to put in the link now in case you do want to set up a time with me. So now it's time to ask a question or two. And I have gotten quite a few questions already in the incorporation aspect, in the registration form. But there are questions that came up now. So Joanna, she asked a couple of questions about what is the supervisor job? So the supervisor job, Joanna, it's an individual who basically is checking that the company is in compliance, that basically nothing is happening under the table. There are no kickbacks being generated. It is a very clean organization. If the supervisor feels that the company is not in compliance, they need to report it to the authorized person who's acting as the shareholder and highlight this. The supervisor was actually generated a long, long time ago when Walmart back in the day had their first protests in Guangzhou because a lot of the employees were being underpaid under the minimum wage. And there was no trade union in those days. And so they created this supervisory board to make sure that every aspect of the company was in compliance. Next question from Emra. The value of shares must be paid when the JV agreement is signed, or can be paid by the time. So in terms of the value of the shares, Emra, it can only be paid once the bank account is opened. And the bank account, if you follow the timeline, is one of the last steps. So once you have agreed on the shares within the JV agreement, again, injection only happens at the point when the bank account's opened. Judy was asking, do you have any banks that you prefer to work with? Yes, I do, but it really comes down to the client. So I tend to work in Shanghai, or I tend to recommend smaller banks in Shanghai. So for example, the Bank of Shanghai, BOS. I recommend Bank of Shanghai because they have a very close relationship and share offices with Santander Bank. So there is a certain level of Western mindset within some of the employees at Bank of Shanghai that I like. English level is always fantastic. And through that referral, what I also like is that the incorporation of the bank account happens at the head office level before going to the branch level. And you always tend to want to choose a branch that is close to your office because there's so much work that has to be done face-to-face at the bank. So that is one that I tend to refer. It actually really comes down to the location that the company chooses. So which district are you going to be in, and what banks are maybe a 5 to 10 minute walk circumference. Because so much work has to be done face-to-face at that bank branch. So I usually recommend clients to take a, go north 10 minutes, south 10 minutes, west 10 minutes, or look at a map to know what banks are in the surrounding area and make a decision then. Meet with the banks, meet with the branch officers, see the English level. I always feel it is very important for a foreign company that the CFO in the head office will have at any point the ability to call the bank and speak in English. Because you may have used an outsourced provider in the beginning, but eventually that will probably, go away. Or you have an accountant and you're not getting transparent answers. So you just want to be able to pick up that phone and call yourself. So you want to have the ability to talk to an account manager that speaks English or can answer emails in English and gives you the answers that you want. I think also another aspect to think about is the online platforms. Most banks offer bilingual online platforms. All are pretty easy to use, kind of. You just need to be able to download the software on your computers to gain access. So it's, a lot of the functions can also be done from your home office. So you will probably understand I'm referencing a lot of local banks, Bank of China, Merchants Bank, ICBC. I don't tend to recommend the foreign banks. I find them very complicated to work with, and I had a very bad experience with one of them. So I'm maybe also a little bit biased, but I don't find the foreign banks to be as efficient as you would like them to be with the local banks. Are there any more questions that have come in? For Judy, Emma, and Joanna, I hope I was able to answer your questions. Seems like nothing else is really popping in. If there is, again, don't hesitate to reach out. Like I said, how we can help, book a strategy session and we'll talk you through these things. The link is in the chat section of the control panel. To finish off today's presentation, we've got 3 more sessions in this series. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about business plans, Wednesday budgets, and on Thursday, top 10 reasons companies are not successful in China. If you haven't registered for those 3 sessions and you're interested to do so, go to our website, woodburnglobal.com/events, and register. I hope you had fun today. I hope it was educational and you got a lot of information. If there's anything else you would like to receive regarding this topic, please don't hesitate to reach out. I want to thank everyone for joining me today, and I hope that I will see you later on in the week. Thank you and goodbye.